Welcome to a Practice Pro CPD, brought to you by LAWPRO.
Hi, I'm Judah Stravchinsky, Director of Practice Pro, LAWPRO's Claims Prevention Program. Thanks for joining me for this talk on fraud prevention and cybersecurity. In this presentation, we'll review the fraud problems faced by lawyers and understand how lawyers are targeted by fraudsters. We'll review the common types of frauds and focus on bad check frauds and cyber frauds. We'll provide fraud prevention and cybersecurity tips and conclude by leaving you with some further resources. Lawyers face a range of significant fraud threats. Bad check schemes continue to be regularly attempted against lawyers in a range of practice settings. Cyber frauds are on the rise and, as we'll see, are also increasing in severity. Real estate fraud remains a major concern, and lawyers need to be continuously vigilant. Corporate frauds and internal frauds continue to pose risks to lawyers and firms as well. Today's presentation focuses on bad checks and cyber frauds. For a presentation on real estate fraud, including corporate frauds in the real estate context, please see practicepro.ca's CPD page for a separate presentation on this topic. It's important to understand the nature of the problem. Lawyers can become involved in what are actually fraudulent transactions in different situations. We can be retained to give an air of legitimacy to what's actually a criminal transaction. We could be sought for services to create a company or a trust or through the purchase of real estate, when in fact the ultimate objective is to money launder through those entities. At times, our trust accounts are sought in order to hide the money trail following a fraud. Lawyers can also be the target for fraudsters. Lawyers are targeted in part because we have bank accounts. Our bank accounts can be used to try to perpetuate bad check frauds or real estate frauds, where money ends up going out of our trust account before we realize that a check that we've received is no good, and then we're stuck with a deficit in our accounts. We're also targeted as small business owners. Ransomware attacks and phishing efforts are commonplace across all industries, but the legal industry is particularly prone to being the subject of such attacks. So, fraudsters prey on human nature and vulnerabilities, and lawyers are vulnerable in part because of our professional calling and our professional training. As lawyers, we try to help people. We try to help clients. We try to help on transactions. We try to help people resolve disputes. We try to help people reduce conflict. We're also afraid of screwing up. We're afraid of making mistakes. And we're afraid when we risk losing clients, because at the end of the day, we also are trying to make sure that we have a viable practice. Fraudsters know these weaknesses. They exploit vulnerabilities to try to get lawyers on side and participating in their fraudulent activities, either by turning a blind eye or knowingly participating. Either way, fraudsters seek to make sure that lawyers do not pay attention to red flags that are on the transactions that they have been involved in. And there are significant consequences for the public when lawyers are involved in a fraudulent transaction. First, there are victims. They may be known to you. It could be that your own client is defrauded of funds. It could be that your own staff become duped in the process of an attack. These types of frauds, when they are known, generally erode the public's faith in lawyers, in our justice system, and our public institutions. They also come at significant cost. In British Columbia, for example, a significant fraud led to a levy, the special additional cost that needed to be instituted over the course of several years in order to ensure that they had sufficient amounts in their insurance program to cover future claims. There are also significant costs for the regulator. When the Law Society has to involve itself in potential frauds, these end up being significant forensic investigations requiring significant time and expertise. They are costly to conduct, and that increases the cost of regulation, which in turn is paid for by lawyers and paralegals. Of course, the consequences for you of being involved in a fraud can be extremely damaging. Of course, there's reputational damage if word gets out that you've participated in a fraud or were duped. There's also a significant professional liability risk. Of course, this will always depend on the situation, but you could end up in litigation. There may be coverage exclusions depending on the type of fraud, your participation in it, and other factors that would have to be considered. Finally, there's the risk of law society discipline. And if you ought to have known of the fraud, you could face significant discipline up to and including losing your license to practice. And a reminder, of course, that LAWPRO's policy excludes coverage for dishonest conduct and for fraudulent, criminal, or malicious acts. If you knowingly are participating in a fraud, you'll be on your own. We do have some limited protection for cybercrime, but it must be the direct result of the performance of your professional services, and there's a total limit of $250,000 that's available. And so there is also a risk, depending on the type of fraud, that even if you are covered in part and you weren't a knowing participant, that there may be excess amounts that you might be responsible for if you don't have sufficient coverage. So let's review some of the frauds that we see at LAWPRO, including bad check frauds. Bad check frauds you can learn about on our sister website, avoidaclaim.com. We describe all the different types of bad checks that are out there. But basically, they are all starting with a fake, made-up legal matter with the goal of having the lawyer run a fraudulent check through trust through your bank account, and then you will disperse the money from that check. The fraudster will get that money, and then the bank will call to tell you that was a fraudulent check. If you've already paid on it, there's a shortfall in your account, and then there's a fight about who at the end of the day is stuck with that shortfall. And if you haven't followed certain protocols, it could be you. So here are some of the common types, and you can read about each and every one of these types on avoidaclaim.com. But in a bad debt collection case, for example, the lawyer is contacted to help some sort of purported business to collect on a bad debt in your jurisdiction. And these can get quite sophisticated, where it looks like it is a genuine company, or the contact information, but for a couple of changed letters, does appear to be a legitimate company. And the fraudster will probably be able to provide some sort of documentation to support this claim. And if you are retained, they will likely be happy to sign, and rather than have a retainer, they would ask you to just take your fees from the settlement, and lo and behold, whoever is supposed to have paid pays very quickly after some minimal work on your part. Turns out, though, that that check is a fraud. You've paid the settlement back out to the fraudster less your fee, but you're holding the bag because it turns out that the check was not worth the paper it was printed on. And that's just one example of a bad debt collection scam, but there are other bad check scams involving family law, where there's a purported disagreement between spouses and money's about to come through miraculously, or a business loan where payment comes due, or IP licenses where payments are due, where the royalty check just needs to get enforced, where somebody needs to write to remind someone to pay for their use of some bogus IP, where there may be an initial retainer paid to you by your own client, but it's a bogus check and then they'd like their money back. And so there are bank protocols on how long you should hold on, and there are insurance protocols about how long you should hold on to your check. The point being, though, is that if you are accepting any payments by check, if you have monies going through trust by check, there are certain requirements that you should be paying attention to. And to be clear, this stuff gets pretty sophisticated. These are some pictures on the next slides of some fake IDs, passports, licenses, documents, checks that lawyers have received. They're all fake. So just to give you a sense of the level of sophistication of the scams that are out there right now. And there are technologies that are getting better and services that are getting better. You can now do a search on an Ontario driver's license for free online through the government. And that can be a very helpful check to make sure that if you are being presented with client ID, it is a legitimate form of ID. But it gets more complicated because we're in a global world and there are all sorts of different types of IDs and purported credentials and purported business structures and purported bank checks. All of these checks are actually frauds, and you'll see some of them look quite believable. They seem to come from reputable banks in many cases, and often it is a clerk or you who have to carefully check and then be careful about when money is going in and out of your account. So bad check schemes are alive and well, unfortunately. And to add on to that, we now have cyber risks that are getting more and more sophisticated daily. So let's talk about some of the types of risks we see. You've probably heard by now about phishing. There's also smishing, which is when it's a text message ask, or vishing, where it's a phone call. And I can't imagine if you haven't heard a phone call yet at your cell phone telling you that there's an arrest warrant out for you for failure to pay taxes. Congratulations, but I'm getting those calls probably once or twice a day right now, and they're aggravating. And just know as you hang up the phone that it may be aggravating to you, but somebody else is scared and somebody else is pressing a button and being purportedly connected to a representative of the CRA or another entity that has some power over their lives. And some people are clearly sending money, making it worth these people's while to continuously harass you by phone, email, text, or otherwise. Sometimes these purport to come from quite reputable sources, not just our government, but big businesses. Banks, for example. I can't count the number of times that I've been called to be told by a big 5 bank, purportedly, that my credit card with them has been compromised and that they are on the line with their fraud prevention center to help me. Well, as soon as you ask that fraud prevention center if they can give you a direct line where you can call them back, you will likely hear the dial tone. The point being, though, is that these are schemes where people are trying to get access to your bank details, credit card number, or other personal information. You've seen some of these presumably already, where somebody sent you a refund. And we see these in our check scams as well, where people try to say that this is a refund check and you've never even heard of the supplier. Sometimes they try to dazzle you with prizes. Sometimes they try to make you anxious and work through your fears of having your privacy or your security violated. These are very sophisticated, and in fact, over 90% of all data breaches start with a phishing scenario where someone has clicked on a link. So here's some examples of some. This is my boss, Dan. I'm regularly phished, by the way, where I get emails that purport to come from Dan asking for my urgent help on something. And if I didn't know that Dan wouldn't act that way, I might actually write back. And if I didn't scroll over the email, I might not realize that that wasn't his LAWPRO address. But here's a purported purchase from Air Canada, and it looks pretty convincing. Here's another one from another former employee, from Kathy Waters, who was our CEO, with a purported email from our controller at the time, asking for some help with some disbursements. And the idea is to try to verify that that is actually an active email address, and then to try to get funds wired, change in a couple of numbers along the way, and out the money goes, never to be seen again. So thankfully, there are some quick fixes to spot phishing scams. The first is that if you put your mouse over an email recipient name, it will show you the full address. And so you can see whether that email is the one you would expect to get mail from, or whether it's a new address entirely. In my case, for example, my boss was sending me things purportedly from a Gmail account, and that Gmail account had a whole string of letters and numbers that made no sense as part of the address info. That clearly was not my boss. Sometimes there will be bad spelling or poor grammar in what's supposedly a professional, sophisticated corporate communication. It's unlikely that a top 5 bank, for example, is going to have a mail out loaded with these types of errors. Sometimes the content simply makes no sense. Usually that's because a fraudster is trying to dazzle you with big terms to scare you into action, but oftentimes for sophisticated readers, it does the reverse. Those promises of receiving big money, or conversely, those threats that something bad has or is about to happen to you, are also key indicators that something might be suspicious or fraudulent. And anyone who's asking for money, even if you know them, it's probably worth checking on by separate channels what that is all about. We step it up a notch and we have the hacked email account. Somebody might have successfully found your email information or password, and we have seen this happen where law firms have lost control over an email address, someone has hacked it, and they are watching and waiting. And then they are sending an email directly within the organization. So, for example, we saw a transaction where on the eve of the sending of hundreds of thousands of dollars for the purchase of a home, a purported employee of a law firm asked for an electronic sending of funds. And if it wasn't for a very knowledgeable clerk on the other side of the transaction who knew that that firm had previously never changed payment instructions in this way, and who called the purported sender of the email to ask, are you sure that's what you would like done? This might have actually succeeded. And there are different ways that this type of scheme gets played. Their varieties involve third parties or other lawyers. The point is just because you get an email from somebody doesn't mean it's necessarily them. And so it's really important to use two-factor authentication. Just like how sometimes if you try to enter your Gmail address or your bank from a new device, they may text you a code. You want to verify by independent means before you send any money anywhere. And so if your boss emails you to say, send money, pick up the phone or walk by their office to make sure that that's actually the instruction. Or if your client has said, pay it, call them back. Make sure that's right. Call them on the number you know is theirs. Make sure it's right, because otherwise that money might go out, and by the time that happens, it's probably too late. We're seeing this a lot these days, this website theft, and it's another example of lawyers who are trusted, and so fraudsters take advantage. We see fraudsters copying website content to build their credibility on their own scam. This probably has nothing to do with the lawyers whose content they've stolen, but what they do is they take pieces of different websites to make what on first glance looks like a credible law firm website. And then they use that to try to encourage people to send money their way on one scam or another where they purport to be a lawyer. And we've been seeing calls about this repeatedly where people are claiming to be lawyers who are offering services in Ontario and providing the name of an actual lawyer providing services in Ontario. And they actually sometimes get better Google hits than the actual lawyer's website. There's not much that can be done. We typically suggest advising the Law Society so that if a member of the public has been duped and has sent money along to a purported law firm, when they complain about that lawyer's already told the Law Society to be on alert. We suggest you contact the website provider to ask for a takedown, and we've got some general guidance on our blog about what else you can be doing. But the truth is lawyers are trusted, and so some people try to piggyback on our goodwill and might even try to piggyback at one point on your own brand, your own image, your very name, your very practice to try to take money from innocent individuals. So it's worth knowing that that's out there. With all that in mind, it's really important to know the tips for how to surf and how to use your tech properly. And a lot of this will likely be pretty basic stuff for you, but it's worth the general reminder. And this is one that we can all use from time to time. So when we're surfing the web, we need to know where we're surfing. Think about that website you're going to. Is it secure? Is it something you know? Or are you clickbaited down into the abyss of the internet and you don't know what you're looking at or why anymore, or who might be providing this site? Here are some surfing don'ts. Don't engage in transactions unless you see HTTPS. There's some out there with HTTP. The S is for secure. Don't go to unknown websites, and certainly don't send any money through unknown websites. USB keys are probably going the way of the dodo, but in the meantime, be really careful sharing them. We've all got stories of lost USBs. If you are using a USB, please encrypt it, lock it, make sure people can't open it. You shouldn't be downloading software unless it's from a reputable, trusted site. I'm told Minecraft is a reputable, trusted site these days, but I would have been skeptical at first. But it's important to do some due diligence if you're ever not sure. And don't click the yes or okay on pop-ups unless you really intend on going there. Remember that you can always shut down your computer if you've gone into some unknown terrain and you're uncomfortable, and that will likely help you avoid disaster. You want to check your gear. Unsecured internet connections are super appealing when you're really in need of some help and you can't get a signal, but just know that those that are purporting to be providing that internet, they may not be there with full good intentions, or it's possible that others might know that that link is there too. And some hackers will take advantage of that. So the hacker's Wi-Fi, you might see Starbucks, for example, not deliberately picking on one in particular, but when you see links, are they really to the Wi-Fi network you're looking for? Your system needs a firewall. Without it, your system could look like this. So here's a depressing list. This is called the worst passwords list. This is the list of the 25 most common passwords from a report produced by internet security firm Splash Data. Splash Data has been doing this study since 2011, and basically what they do is they have published this list based on data examined from millions of passwords leaked in data breaches mostly occurring in North America and Western Europe. So you can see that the leader, it's a crazy one. It has a warm place in my heart thanks to Spaceballs, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is still the number one, and it is unchanged from last year. But Splash Data estimates that almost 10% of people online have used at least one of these 25 worst passwords. They think that nearly 3% of the population online is using the Spaceballs password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty sad. When you look at these are pretty easy. A hacker could be using these 25 just to see if they get lucky. The point is that if you don't take care of your password, it's pretty easy for these to be hacked. So let's learn a bit about what you could be doing if you happen to have any of these as any of your passwords. Password security really boils down to how sophisticated a string of letters, numbers, and symbols you're able to use. A 9-letter password that's just letters, according to howsecureismypassword.net, can be cracked in about 2 minutes. And keep in mind, technology just keeps getting smarter, so that 2 minutes is likely going to drop over time. It gets harder to crack as you add new levels of sophistication. According to the same website, if you add 2 numbers to a 9-letter password, it can take a month to crack using current technology. If you add a symbol to those 2 numbers and 9 letters, it can take over a century, currently 2 centuries, before you can crack most passwords. So adding symbols and numbers to letters is a key. All of this leads to our password best practices. First, you want to regularly change your passwords on key accounts, just to make sure that you're not compromised over time. You need to change any passwords that have been compromised immediately. When you get a password data breach from a provider, it's vital that you switch that password out ASAP. You would like, ideally, to use different passwords for different accounts. That can be hard to keep track of, and that's why there are password managers. These are very low cost, and there are all sorts of different managers available out there. One option would be to go check out PC Magazine, or to talk to some friends, or to check out as you would see fit on Google to figure out one that works best for you. But these password managers help keep this simple. Biometric, not everyone goes for, but those who do, keep in mind that you can now sign into your bank, your computer, your phone, using a fingerprint or retina scan, depending on the level of biometric scan. These do enhance security. Of course, there are privacy concerns that you may have. But using two-step verification, like the banks do, can always help when you are using sites which require a form of login. If two-step authentication is available, it's a great path to enhance your security. So here are the key lessons. First, lawyers are targets for fraud. We're an attractive fraud target because we operate trust accounts and because we're small businesses. Fraudsters will seek to exploit our human vulnerabilities, and so you and your staff need to keep vigilant. You should stay up to speed regarding new frauds, train your staff about fraud prevention, always stay vigilant, and when in doubt, ask for help. Practice supports are available, and LAWPRO and the Practice Pro team are here to help as well. To learn more, here are a few additional resources. Of course, there's practicepro.ca. You can learn more about issues such as COVID-19. We've got continuing professional development, practice aids. All of the LawPro magazines are available from this site, as well as other helpful resources, including template retainer letters and our managing series booklets. You can download LawPro's fraud fact sheets for cybercrime and bad check scams and for real estate from practicepro.ca. These resources provide key tips for what to do if you have a suspicious matter. Avoidaclaim.com has the latest news on claims prevention and practice management. It also has fraud warnings and descriptions of the common frauds that lawyers see. You can subscribe for updates right at avoidaclaim.com in the top right. And if you ever do hear of a suspicious matter involving lawyers, feel free to shoot us an email. This is where lawyers send us their info, fraudinfo@lawpro.ca, and they sometimes call us directly. We have a fraud team at LawPro who take what we call hot calls, which are real-time calls from lawyers out there who need some help determining whether a suspicious matter is potentially fraudulent. Thanks very much for watching. Feel free to connect with me personally and follow LawPro and Practice Pro on Twitter. LawPro also is on LinkedIn. We look forward to staying in touch. Thanks very much.